Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Dar's Nights. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before you drift off, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get comfortable and begin. It was Officer Dean Mercer's first solo patrol shift, graveyard hours, the kind that chewed through time in silence like molasses. The streets were dead quiet, save for the occasional flicker of a streetlight struggling to stay alive. Dean had only been with the department 3 months, but tonight was the first time they trusted him alone in Unit 14. The weight of the badge sat heavy on his chest, a mixture of pride and pressure. Midnight passed unnoticed. At 12:17 a.m., his radio crackled, not the usual dispatcher voice. This one was softer, like it came through a warm filter, slightly delayed, yet clear. Unit 14, we have a 10-56A, possible jumper. 48, Clearwater Drive. Proceed with caution. Dean sat up straight. The voice was unfamiliar. Not Tammy, the usual night dispatcher. This one sounded older, gentle but with an odd, echoing undertone. 10-4, he responded, double-checking the address, and the GPS odd thing was 48 Clearwater had been condemned for over a decade. He remembered the rookie briefing. An apartment fire back in 2003 killed 3 people there, including a child. The building was sealed and scheduled for demolition, but never was. As he pulled onto the street, a thick mist had settled like a blanket. The building loomed ahead, its top floors hollowed out, black windows like gouged eyes watching him approach. No lights, no movement, but his radio chirped again. He's still up there, Officer Mercer. Top floor, room 506. Be careful. Dean froze. He hadn't given his name. Not to her. The radio display blinked green. Active transmission. But the signal ID was blank. No station ID. No location trace. He parked, hand resting on his sidearm. The silence around him growing denser by the second. The elevator was out, of course. As he climbed the cracked stairwell, the air turned stale, suffocating. Dust clung to everything like it had been waiting years to be disturbed. 5th floor, hallway stretched endlessly, peeling wallpaper, water damage, silence, so loud it rang in his ears. Room 506 was at the far end, door barely hanging on by its rusty hinges. Dean approached slowly, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. He knocked. Police? Anyone in there? Nothing. He pushed the door open. The room was empty. No signs of life. Just scorched walls, broken glass, and a half-melted children's toy resting near the window. A small plastic fire truck, warped and blackened. Dean walked inside cautiously. Then his radio came alive again. You just missed him. He was standing right where you are. Looking down. He said the flames felt cold. Dean spun around, breath caught in his throat. The voice was close, almost whispering into his ear now. But the radio still glowed green, signal active, no origin. His heart pounded in his chest. Who is this? He demanded. A pause. Then calmly, I was a dispatcher here. Before the fire, before the screams. The radio went silent. Dean stared at it, willing it to make sense. This had to be a prank. A messed up hazing from the other officers. But it didn't feel like a joke. The voice wasn't amused. It was lost. Lonely. He left the building quickly, not bothering to finish the report. As he climbed back into his cruiser, he dialed Central Dispatch. Hey, this is Mercer. Just got called to 48 Clearwater for a jumper. Did you guys send that out? A moment of static, then Tammy's familiar voice. Negative, Unit 14. No calls for that address tonight. And Dean, that place burned down in 2003. Nobody's lived there since. Dean stared ahead at the ruin through his windshield. The plastic fire truck, still visible in the window 5 floors up. His fingers trembled as he reached for the ignition. The radio clicked on one last time. I'll call again soon. Dean didn't sleep when he got home that morning. He sat on the edge of his bed, uniform still clinging to his skin, trying to convince himself it had all been a prank, a glitch, a tired mind misfiring. But no matter how many times he replayed it, the voice stuck with him. Not just the words, but the way they felt. Cold, hollow, like she was stuck somewhere in between. The next shift, Dean requested to ride solo again. He didn't tell anyone about the call. Not yet. He needed to know if it was real. At 2:09 a.m., his radio chirped. Unit 14, we have a 10 to 52. Abandoned vehicle, lights on, door ajar. Coordinates transmitting now. He froze. The voice again. Same gentle tone. No signal ID. Copy, he said quietly, watching the GPS update on his screen. The location was deep in the woods, a dirt road most officers avoided because of how poorly it was maintained. But Dean followed it anyway, gravel crunching under the wheels as the trees swallowed him whole. The car was there, a silver sedan, engine running, door wide open. No one inside, no footprints, just nothing. The kind of quiet that screams. Dean stepped out slowly, scanning with his flashlight. The beam cut through the mist, catching movement in the trees. He turned, but nothing was there. Just then, the radio hissed again. He was looking for his daughter. Said he heard her voice coming from the trees. Dean gripped the mic. Who was? But the voice ignored him. She died in this car, locked inside. Windows shut. Summer heat. Her father never forgave himself. Dean stepped closer. There on the back seat was a faded pink backpack. Minnie Mouse. Tiny. A juice box and crayons still inside. He backed away. You're not real, he whispered. But the voice replied calmly. Real enough to help, aren't I? The radio fell silent again. By the time he filed his report, Dean omitted every strange detail. He logged it as a possible abandoned vehicle. Nothing more. But it didn't end there. The next night, she called again. 10 to 54. Suspicious male pacing the bridge. Might jump. Same calm voice. Same chill. Dean responded. Driving out to Harrow's Crossing, a bridge known for 3 suicides in the last 5 years. He parked, stepped out, and immediately saw him. A man, back turned, standing at the edge, hands clenched white on the rail. Dean called out, Hey, step back. Let's talk. The man didn't move. Dean stepped closer. I'm here to help. Don't do this. Then the man whispered something Dean couldn't hear. What? He asked, coming just a little closer. Then the man turned around. His face was gone. Just smooth skin where features should be, like wax melted down. Dean stumbled back, heart punching through his chest. The figure stepped forward, slow, jerky, unnatural. Dean reached for his weapon, backing toward his cruiser. The figure vanished. Not ran, not ducked, just blinked out of existence like a TV turning off. Dean stood there, frozen, until the radio crackled again. Don't chase ghosts, Dean. They're not yours to save. That night, he dreamt of fire, walls melting, screams echoing through smoke. And standing in the center, untouched, was a woman in a dispatcher's uniform. She was smiling, but not kindly. The next morning, he looked up the department archives. There it was, Margaret Dorsey, dispatcher, died on duty in 2003. Fire started from an electrical surge in the radio room. She was the only one inside, burned alive, clutching the mic in her hand. Dean stared at the photo. It was her, that voice. He visited the old radio room, long since closed off, sealed behind a bolted steel door in the basement of the precinct. But the hallway still smelled faintly of smoke, and carved into the door, barely visible in the light, were the words, "Still taking calls." That night, her voice returned. This time, he's hurt, bleeding bad. Alleyway behind Red Mark Deli. Dean drove fast, too fast. He turned the alley and found a man slumped against the wall, blood pooling under him. His eyes fluttered open. "Help!" the man gasped. Dean rushed over, radioing it in. "This is Unit 14. I need EMS now." Male with stab wounds. No ID yet. But dispatch responded immediately. Tammy this time. "Dean, we didn't get a call from you yet." "What are you talking about?" He froze, then looked at the victim. He was gone. No blood. No body. Just dark, damp pavement. Dean stood in the alley alone, the sound of static licking his ears. "She's playing with you," Tammy said later when he told her everything. "And if she's reaching out like this, it's because she wants something." Dean knew what that meant. Every call was a breadcrumb, a lure, each one darker than the last, more desperate, more disturbing. Over the next week, the calls kept coming. A man locked in a warehouse with someone scratching under the floorboards. A missing child whose laughter echoed from a sealed storm drain. An abandoned patrol car parked in front of the church. Inside, a long-dead officer still handcuffed to the wheel. Each scene felt more personal, as if she was crafting them for Dean, like riddles, ghost stories only he could solve. But there were no answers, just echoes. Then one night, she spoke directly. "Dean, you've done well, but now I need you to come back." "Back where?" he asked, voice trembling. "Where it started. You know the way." Dean did. He returned to 48 Clearwater. This time, the front door was open. Inside, the air was thick, choking. The building groaned like it was alive. As he climbed the stairs, the walls bled ash. The air turned hotter with each step. Room 506 waited. Inside, the room was no longer abandoned. It was restored, exactly as it had been in 2003. Desk, radio panel, coffee mug still half full, and sitting in the chair was Margaret Dorsey, or what was left of her. Her skin was burned through in places, revealing muscle and bone, but her smile remained warm. "I never left," she said. Dean couldn't speak. "You answer my calls. All of them, even when no one else would." Her voice softened. "They stopped listening when I died. But you didn't. You're different." Dean looked around. "What do you want from me?" Her smile vanished. "To take my place." Dean took a step back. His eyes darted to the door, to the hallway, to anything that wasn't her, but she was everywhere now. Her voice, that gentle whisper of smoke and static, echoed through the walls like the building itself was breathing her name. "You've already stepped over," she said quietly. "You just haven't realized it yet." He tried to speak, but something caught in his throat. His mouth moved, but the air didn't respond. No sound came out. Like the rules of the world inside this room didn't follow the laws he knew. Margaret stood, or rather, something that wore her shape did. Her uniform was scorched at the shoulders, her badge number half melted. Skin flaked away like old wallpaper, revealing glimpses of red muscle beneath. But her smile was untouched. It never wavered. "I waited 20 years for someone to listen," she said. "Every call I made, they ignored me. Treated my voice like a ghost in the system. Background noise." Dean backed toward the door. "You're not real," he choked out finally. "You're just a memory. A recording stuck in the system. A glitch." Margaret tilted her head. "Then why do I know your thoughts? Why do I know that your father was a cop who died on duty? That your mother burned every photo of him because she couldn't bear to see his badge?" Dean's heart froze in his chest. "That's not," he started. "But it is," she said. "I know what you fear. Not dying. Being forgotten. Dying without anyone hearing your voice on the other end of the line." Behind her, the radio came to life again. It hissed, crackled, then began replaying every dispatch call Dean had ever taken, his voice echoing from the static, slightly off, slightly twisted. "Unit 14, I'm en route. Got a body in the alley. Looks like a suicide, notify coroner. And then, his own voice from tonight. Where it started, you know the way. Dean turned, bolted for the door. The hallway outside was wrong, longer than it had been. Doors on both sides were opening slowly, creaking outward. Shadows bled from the cracks. Whispers followed him, crawling along the floor like fog. He ran. Stairwell. Down. Fast. Every step groaned under his weight. The walls rippled like wet paint. The exit sign flickered above the main door, then blinked out completely. Dean crashed through it anyway. But he wasn't outside. He was back in the precinct. Not the real one. This one was twisted, half drowned in shadow, lights swinging above like nooses. The desks were charred, walls blackened, and at every dispatch terminal sat a figure. All of them had no faces, just melted skin and empty eye sockets, staring straight ahead, silently gripping old-style radios. Every time a red light blinked, a voice would whisper a number. 10 to 56, 10 to 52, 10 to 99. Dean moved through them like a man in a dream he couldn't wake from. He found the squad room. His locker was there. He opened it. Inside, his badge, but it was cracked down the middle. He stared at it, then at the mirror mounted beside it, and in the mirror, he saw himself, wearing a dispatcher's headset, sitting at a terminal, eyes bloodshot, lips moving slowly, transmitting calls into the void. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He spun. Margaret stood behind him again. "I didn't lie," she said softly. "You did answer my calls. You were kind, brave, and now you'll never be alone again." Dean screamed, but no one heard it. In the real world, a week later, Unit 14 was found abandoned off Route 27. Engine off, radio cold, no trace of Officer Mercer. His badge was on the seat. The last log radio call was blank. No audio, no timestamp, just a soft hiss. Dispatch report showed no transmission at the time of his disappearance. But sometimes, just sometimes, around 2 or 3 a.m., rookie officers on night shift say their radios come alive. Even when off the grid, a gentle woman's voice asks for Unit 14, says there's a possible 10 to 50, send coordinates to nowhere, and sometimes when they answer, they find themselves back at 48 Clearwater, where the 5th floor doesn't exist anymore, where the rooms are locked from the inside, and where the dispatch line is always open, waiting for someone new to take the call. So if you ever hear her voice whisper through the static, asking for help, asking you to check a scene no one else knows about, don't answer, because Margaret Dorsey is still taking calls, and she's always hiring. Story 2. The Bailey Creek Police Station had long been a place of memories, both good and bad. But there was one memory that no one dared to touch, the 1982 murder spree that had scarred the town. The case had gone cold. No arrest had ever been made, and the murderer, simply known as the Shadow, was never caught. After 25 years, the killer's identity still haunted the walls of the station. It had all started with the opening of a long-forgotten evidence locker, a dusty relic from the past. This locker had been sealed for over 2 decades. But when the station was finally renovated and an inventory of old files was undertaken, this locker was among the many objects that had been overlooked. No one knew what lay inside. But Ben Carson, a rookie cop at the time, was about to find out. Sergeant Carson stood in front of the rusty metal locker. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed to the otherwise silent station. His heart raced as he slowly pulled open the heavy door, revealing the contents within. Inside, there were only a few items: a blood-stained shirt, a set of tarnished keys, and a small, tattered journal. As his fingers touched the journal, a chill ran up his spine. It was almost as though the book itself was waiting to be opened. Ben glanced over at his partner, Detective Laura Hayes, who stood a few feet away. She had heard the rumors, just like he had, the whispers of the cursed locker, the eerie disappearances that had followed the reopening of old cases in other precincts. But she didn't believe in ghosts, and neither did Ben, at least not until now. The journal, though old, was readable. The ink was faded but still legible. Ben opened the first page, and as his eyes scanned the words, a cold shiver ran down his back. The handwriting was erratic, almost frenzied. I will never be caught. The shadow is free, and I am the only one who knows the truth. The cops will never catch me, but they will feel my wrath. My spirit will haunt them forever. Ben's breath caught in his throat as he read the words. He glanced at Laura, whose face had gone pale. The confession was written in the hand of someone who was beyond reason, someone who had been consumed by darkness. But the worst part wasn't confession. It was the final line. When the locker is opened, the chain will be broken. The shadow will rise again. Ben couldn't move. His fingers trembled as he turned the page. Each entry grew more disturbing. It was clear that the killer had known something others didn't, something twisted and dangerous. But what was worse was that, in the final pages, the killer seemed to be speaking directly to him. I know you. I can feel your presence. When the time comes, you will be mine. The evidence will rise again, and you will not escape. Ben slammed the journal shut, his mind racing. He had to tell someone. But Laura was already backing away from the evidence locker, her eyes wide with fear. Ben, we need to get out of here, she whispered, her voice shaky. Ben nodded. The room felt colder now. There was a heaviness in the air, as though something was watching them. They left the room together, but as they walked down the dimly lit hallway, they couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. It wasn't until later that night, when Ben returned to his apartment, that things began to unravel. The feeling of being watched intensified. It was almost as if the shadows in the corners of his room were moving, waiting for him. The police radio, normally quiet and still, crackled to life, startling him. He leaned closer to it, his hand trembling as he grabbed a receiver. Unit 4, respond, the voice on the other end said. It was distorted, far too clear for the static on the line. Unit 4, respond. Ben's blood ran cold. There was no one else on the line. He knew that voice. He had heard it before. It was the same distorted voice from the journal. Who is this? Ben demanded, his voice shaking. The reply came slowly, almost like a whisper. You open the locker. Now you will understand. Suddenly, the lights in his apartment flickered. The door slammed shut, and the room grew deathly silent. Ben couldn't breathe. He felt like he was suffocating, like the air had thickened. A cold, creeping feeling crawled over him, and for the first time, he truly felt afraid. The shadow was real, and it was coming for him. Ben had been hearing the voice ever since that moment. At first, it was a faint whisper, a distorted crackle that could have been mistaken for static on the radio. But the more he tried to ignore it, the louder it became. Now it was undeniable. The voice had taken form, and it was coming for him. He couldn't sleep. Every time his eyes closed, his mind replayed the journal's last entry. The evidence will rise again, and you will not escape. Ben stared out the window of his small apartment. The streets of Bailey Creek looked peaceful enough under the glow of the streetlights, but he knew better now. There was something else lurking, something malevolent, something tied to the cursed evidence locker. His phone vibrated, and he immediately reached for it, his heart pounding. It was a text message from Laura. Ben, something's happening at the station. We need to go back. Now. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and rushed out the door. As he drove through the empty streets, his mind raced. What had happened at the station? Was it connected to Journal? Or was it something far worse? When he arrived at the Bailey Creek police station, he found the front doors wide open, as if they had been left in a hurry. The night air felt strangely cold, biting, even though it wasn't particularly chilly outside. Inside, the usual hum of the station was gone. There was no chatter, no phone calls, only silence. "Laura?" Ben called out as he stepped inside, his voice echoing in the empty hall. He moved cautiously through the building, each footstep growing heavier as the silence pressed down on him. His instincts were screaming at him to turn back, but he couldn't. Not after everything that had happened. Not after the voice had promised him this. He finally found her in the evidence room, the very place where this nightmare had begun. Laura was standing at the open locker, staring at it in disbelief. "Ben," she whispered, her face pale, eyes wide. It's happening." Ben walked closer, his heart sinking as he saw what she was staring at. The items in the locker, the blood-stained shirt, the tarnished keys, had begun to shift. They moved slowly, as if being pulled by invisible strings. The journal lay open, its pages flipping wildly as if an unseen hand was flipping through it. Ben's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the handwriting. It was the killer's. It had to be. Suddenly, the station lights flickered and the temperature dropped, the air growing thick with an oppressive weight. It felt as though the entire building was being suffocated. "Ben," Laura whispered again, her voice barely audible. "He's here. The shadow, he's real. He's coming for us." Before Ben could respond, the floor beneath their feet groaned, and a low growl echoed from the depths of the station. It was a sound that didn't belong in the human world, a deep, guttural noise that sent chills running down their spines. Ben felt his pulse quicken. It was too much. The spirit of the killer had never truly left the station. It had been waiting for someone to open the locker, waiting for someone to bring the evidence back to life. Suddenly, the door to the evidence room slammed shut behind them. Ben whipped around, his eyes wide with panic. The growl grew louder, and in the dim light, he saw something moving, shadows twisting and curling, converging in the center of the room. Out of the darkness, a figure began to take shape. It was cloaked in black, its features indistinguishable, its presence suffocating. "Ben," Laura gasped. "That's him. That's the shadow." Ben felt his legs turn to jelly. The air felt thick with malice. It was as though every corner of the room was closing in, the walls bending inward, the shadows creeping toward them. But it wasn't just a shadow. It was a killer's spirit, and it had been waiting for this moment, waiting to claim the souls of those who had dared disturb the evidence. Ben tried to move, but he couldn't. His body was frozen, paralyzed by fear. The shadow's voice echoed through the room, a distorted whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You should have left it closed. You should have never opened the locker." Ben's heart raced as the figure began to step forward, its movement slow but deliberate. He tried to scream, to move, but his voice failed him. His body refused to cooperate. "Ben, we have to get out of here," Laura shouted, pulling at his arm. But it was too late. The room seemed to close in on Ben and Laura as the figure of the shadow advanced toward them. Each step it took was slow and deliberate, its form flickering in and out of reality, like a bad signal on an old television. The air grew heavier with each passing second, as though the very atmosphere was thickening with an invisible force. Laura's grip tightened around Ben's arm, but he couldn't move. Fear had a hold of him so tight, it felt like a vice around his chest. He tried to force his legs to move, but they wouldn't listen. The shadow reached out, and Ben could see the faint outline of its skeletal hand. It was nothing more than a silhouette, yet it felt more real than anything else in the room. It was like staring into the abyss, and the abyss was staring back. You think you can end this? The shadow's voice echoed, but it wasn't a single voice. It was multiple voices, layered together, each more distorted than the last. You think you can bury me again? I am the evidence. I am the shadow in every corner of this place. Ben's heart pounded in his ears. Every word that the shadow spoke felt like it was echoing through his mind, louder than the last, and he could feel it pressing down on him like a physical force. What do you want from us? Ben managed to croak, his throat dry as dust. His eyes were glued to the figure that now stood mere inches from him. The shadow tilted its head, its form flickering like a candle caught in a gust of wind. I want what was promised, justice, my case reopened, my name to be known. The figure's hand moved, and the shadows in the room seemed to twist and writhe in response, as if they were alive. Laura's breath came in short gasps, and she turned to Ben. We can't stay here. We need to get out. Now. But it was too late. The room's door, which had been sealed just moments before, burst open with violent force, sending the door slamming against the wall. The lights flickered once again, and the shadows began to move, crawling along the walls, stretching toward Ben and Laura like dark, malevolent fingers. In that moment, Ben finally broke free from his paralysis, his survival instincts kicking in. He grabbed Laura's hand, pulling her toward the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening thud just as they reached it. They were trapped. The shadow raised its hand, and suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted. Ben's breath came out in visible clouds, and his fingers began to numb. He could see the condensation forming on his clothes, freezing over as the spirit's power took hold. Laura screamed as a shadowy figure lunged toward them, its form now fully solidifying into something monstrous. It was no longer just a fleeting specter. It was flesh and bone, a twisted version of the killer from the past. Ben pushed Laura behind him, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. He drew it, but the moment his fingers touched the handle, the gun felt as if it were frozen, glued to the holster. The shadow's power had reached into every corner of the room, bending reality around them. You're not leaving, the figure rasped, the words coming out like a hiss. You disturbed what should have remained forgotten, and now you belong to me. With a surge of unnatural strength, the shadow reached out, grabbing Ben by the throat. He gasped for air, his vision blurring as the creature's grip tightened. He could feel the icy fingers digging into his skin, and in that moment he knew he was fighting for his life. Laura rushed forward, grabbing a metal chair and swinging it at the creature. It passed right through it, as though the shadow was nothing more than smoke. The force of the blow sent her crashing into the wall, but the creature barely acknowledged her. Ben struggled, his hands clawing at the shadowy fingers constricting around his neck. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, each beat louder than the last. But in the midst of his desperation, he remembered something, the journal. The killer had left it behind for a reason. Maybe, just maybe, it held the key to stopping this. Laura, Ben choked out, his voice barely audible. The journal. We need the journal. Laura's eyes went wide with understanding. She scrambled across the floor, reaching the desk where the journal lay open, its pages still fluttering in the air. She grabbed it, holding out to Ben, who tried to read the fading ink through his blurred vision. Suddenly, a horrible realization struck him. The journal wasn't just a record of the killer's action. It was part of the curse. Each page that turned brought the spirit closer to freedom. The more they read, the stronger the shadow became. In one last desperate move, Ben made a choice. Burn it, he yelled, his voice hoarse. Laura hesitated for a moment, and then she did it. She grabbed a lighter from her pocket and set the journal aflame. The moment the flames touched the pages, the room erupted with a screeching, wailing sound, a noise so loud, so deafening, it felt like the world itself was tearing apart. The shadows writhed violently, swirling around them like a storm. The shadow let out a roar, its form dissolving into a cloud of dark smoke. The walls of the evidence room shook violently, and the temperature plummeted to unbearable lows. Ben and Laura were thrown to the ground by the force of the explosion. The journal burned brighter, its pages curling into ash. But the shadows were not done yet. The flames from the burning journal crackled louder, and the shadowy tendrils around them began to dissipate, but the air still felt thick with something malevolent. Ben's breath was shallow, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the heat of the fire on his skin, but it wasn't enough to push away the oppressive weight of the spirit that still loomed over them. As the last of the journal turned to ash, the wailing sound began to fade. The shadows around the room flickered one last time, the walls of the evidence room shaking violently. The temperature suddenly returned to normal, but the eerie silence left in the wake of the chaos felt deafening. Laura crawled toward Ben, her face pale but determined. "Is it over?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "Did we do it?" Ben didn't answer immediately. He was still trying to process what had just happened, his mind reeling. The air was heavy, suffocating. It didn't feel like the spirit was gone. It felt like it was waiting, lurking in the shadows just out of sight, biding its time. "No," Ben said, his voice a whisper. "It's not over. Not yet." He got to his feet, still feeling the lingering cold in his bones. He looked around the room, but everything seemed wrong. The shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, as though they were pulling away from the light. There was a sense of impending doom, a final moment of reckoning that had yet to come. Suddenly, the door to the evidence room slammed shut again, and the temperature dropped once more. This time, it wasn't just cold. It was freezing, as if the very air had turned to ice. Ben could see his breath again, clouding in front of him. "Ben, I don't think we can stop it," Laura whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "I think it's too late." But Ben wasn't ready to give up. There had to be something. There had to be another way. The figure of the shadow materialized again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just an ethereal, flickering presence. It was solid, viciously solid, like a physical manifestation of death itself. Its features were still vague, but Ben could feel the malicious intent emanating from it, as if it had finally broken free of the evidence room and was now ready to claim its victims. The shadow tilted its head, the hollow eyes locked onto Ben. "You think you can burn me away with a simple fire? You think you can erase me? I am the evidence. I am the past. You cannot destroy what is already dead." Ben took a step back, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him like a vice. He had seen this before. When he read through the journal, he realized that the killer's spirit wasn't just tied to the objects in the evidence locker. It was tied to the station itself, to the place where he had once been confined. It wasn't a matter of burning the journal or destroying physical evidence. It was about breaking the cycle. And the cycle could only be broken if they faced the killer's spirit head-on. They had to confront the entity in a way that would sever its hold on the precinct forever. But how? Suddenly it came to him. He remembered something the journal had mentioned in passing. A name forgotten is a soul never at rest. A name remembered, a life redeemed. Ben turned to Laura, his eyes wide with realization. "We have to remember his name." Laura looked confused, but before she could ask, Ben spoke again. "The killer's name. It's the only way to stop him. We have to bring his name back to life. We have to make him human again." The shadow growled in anger, sensing that they were getting closer to the truth. It lunged at them, its dark form surging through the air like an unstoppable wave. But Ben was ready. He grabbed a pen from his pocket and began to scribble on the back of the journal's last page, the only page that hadn't been destroyed in the fire. The words came to him almost instinctively. "Don't just write it," Laura pleaded, panic rising in her voice. "We don't know if..." "It's the only way," Ben interrupted, his voice steady. "Trust me," he wrote quickly, the name forming in jagged letters, James Carter. As soon as the final stroke of the pen hit the page, the temperature in the room shifted. The shadows retreated slightly, as if recoiling from the power of the name. The shadow stopped mid-lunge. Its form flickered once again, but this time it began to waver. The darkness that had consumed the room seemed to ebb, slowly, reluctantly. Ben felt a surge of hope as he watched the shadow falter. "James Carter," he said aloud, his voice stronger now. "That was your name. You were a person. You had a life. But now you become a nightmare, and we're going to put you to rest." The shadow screeched, a sound that sent a chill down Ben's spine. The walls shook once more, but this time the energy in the room was different. It was as if the killer's spirit was fighting against the weight of his own name, fighting against the reality of his past life. But it was too late. The name had been spoken. The cycle was broken. With a final, deafening roar, the shadow disintegrated into a whirlwind of dark smoke, spiraling into nothingness. The room was silent. The room felt eerily still, the suffocating weight of the spirit's presence evaporating in an instant, the chill that had plagued the air, turning it into something like a frozen graveyard, lifted. Ben stood there, frozen, his eyes locked on the place where the shadow had been just moments ago. He could hardly believe it. Had they really done it? The oppressive darkness that had filled the room for what felt like an eternity was gone, replaced by a strange sense of calm. The temperature was normal once more, and the swirling shadows that had once twisted in the corners of the room were now nothing more than a distant memory. Laura, still on the floor, slowly pushed herself up. She was shaking, but the look on her face was one of quiet relief. "Is it over?" she whispered, almost afraid to believe it. Ben didn't answer immediately. His mind was still racing, but the overwhelming sense of dread that had plagued him for so long had vanished. It was as if the very fabric of the precinct had shifted, the ghosts of the past receding into the shadows from which they had emerged. I think it's over," Ben finally replied, his voice hoarse. His heart still beat loudly in his chest, but now it was a sign of life rather than a reminder of fear. But as the seconds ticked by, something else began to surface in Ben's mind, something troubling, something that didn't sit right with him. "Laura," he said, his voice growing more serious, "we need to get out of here. Now." Laura looked at him, a hint of confusion on her face. "What do you mean? We're free. It's done." Ben nodded, but his gaze was locked on the door to the evidence room, which still stood ajar. Something wasn't right. There was no reason for the door to be open. The last time he saw it, it had been sealed shut, locked by something far more powerful than any earthly force. But now it was open, and beyond it, the hallway seemed different. The flickering lights that had been consistent all night were gone, replaced by an unsettling, unnatural darkness that filled the corridor. "Ben," Laura's voice was tinged with worry. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer her immediately, but instinctively, he moved toward the door. His heart thudded against his chest again, louder than before. There was something pulling him toward it, like an unseen force, a whisper in his mind urging him to step into the unknown. "Stay close," Ben muttered, and Laura followed him hesitantly. They both stepped into the hallway, and Ben immediately felt the difference. The air was thick with something he couldn't quite describe, something oppressive, something not of this world. And then he saw it. At the end of the hallway, the shadowy figure of a man stood, not the killer's spirit. This figure was something else entirely. It was just a silhouette, an outline in the dark, but Ben knew exactly who it was. It was James Carter, or at least what was left of him. "Ben, who's that?" Laura whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," he replied, his breath catching in his throat. But he did know. Deep down, he understood what was happening. It wasn't over. It had never been over. The name they had spoken had only done one thing. It had set James Carter's spirit free, but it hadn't set him to rest. Instead, it had opened a door, and now the killer was free to roam. The figure turned slowly, its face emerging from the shadows, and Ben saw it. The hollow eyes, the twisted grin, the remnants of the man who had once been alive, now twisted into something far worse than death. "Ben," Laura said urgently, "we have to go. Now." But it was too late. The hallway stretched out before them, longer than it had ever been, and the air grew colder still. Ben tried to move, but his legs felt heavy, as though the very ground was holding him in place. The figure of James Carter took a step forward, and the darkness around them seemed to pulse in time with his every movement. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished. The hallway was empty. Ben and Laura stood there, breathing heavily, but still unable to move. A cold sweat formed on the back of Ben's neck. What just happened?" he asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "The name," he said, barely above a whisper. It didn't stop him. It only released him. The temperature continued to drop, and the flickering lights above them began to die one by one. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own breaths. "No," Laura said, shaking her head. "This can't be happening. It can't. We destroyed the journal. We stopped him." Ben grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "It's not over. We thought we were fighting the past, but we were fighting something worse. We need to go now, before it's too late." But as Ben turned to lead Laura away, the hallway twisted once again. The walls began to close in around them, the shadows crawling up the sides like hungry creatures. And just before the last light flickered out completely, Ben heard a whisper, so faint that he almost missed it. "Your time will come." It wasn't over, not by a long shot, and the terror was only just beginning. Ben's heart pounded in his chest as he and Laura stood frozen in the middle of the hallway. The once familiar precinct now felt like a prison, a nightmare come to life. The walls seemed to close in around them, the flickering lights overhead creating an almost strobe-like effect that distorted their vision, making the shadows dance and pulse in a terrifying rhythm. The silence was suffocating, and the air felt thick, as if it were alive, breathing, waiting. The figure, the shadow, was gone, but something about the room, the very air around them, felt different. It was as though the room itself was shifting, changing in real time. Ben had experienced this feeling before, when the spirits or entities were nearby. But this was something far worse. The darkness didn't just haunt the precinct. It was in it, part of it. The building had become the spirit's domain. Laura, still pale and shaking, clung to Ben's side, her hand gripping his tightly. "Ben, this isn't right," she whispered. "It's not over. We're not safe." Ben didn't answer immediately. His eyes were scanning the hallway, each shadow lurking like an impending threat. He could feel it. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just a lingering sense of terror. The very structure of the station felt like it was shifting, bending, as if the walls themselves were distorting to trap them inside. "We have to move," Ben said, his voice low but urgent. "Now." He grabbed Laura's arm and began pulling her toward the exit, but as they moved forward, the door at the end of the hallway, once a familiar exit to the outside world, slammed shut with a deafening bang. Laura screamed, stumbling back as the sound reverberated through the precinct. The walls seemed to pulse once more, and Ben could feel the temperature drop again. This wasn't just cold. It was bone-chilling, an unnatural frost that seeped into his very being. "We're trapped," Ben muttered, his words barely audible as they echoed in the dead silence. Suddenly, the lights overhead flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And that's when Ben saw it. A flash of movement in the far corner, a figure cloaked in darkness, waiting. He froze, recognizing the shape immediately. It wasn't just a shadow. It was James Carter, or what had become of him. The killer's spirit had somehow broken free of the confines of the evidence room, but he hadn't left the precinct. He had become one with it. His eyes, hollow and black, pierced through the darkness, his mouth twisted into a wicked grin, as though he had won, as though Ben and Laura were merely pawns in his game. The shadow now had a power far beyond what they could comprehend. "You think you stopped me?" The voice came, deep and hollow, reverberating in their minds like a distant echo. "You think burning the evidence would free you? You're fools. This is my domain now, my revenge, and you will never leave." Ben stepped back, pulling Laura with him. "Stay close," he whispered. The terror rising in his chest made his voice shake, but he forced himself to keep calm. "We need to find a way out. There has to be a way." But as he looked around, the hallways twisted. The architecture of the precinct seemed to distort, warping and stretching. The doors and windows, once familiar, had vanished. The precinct had become a labyrinth of endless corridors, and the walls seemed to bend inward like a trap. "You're not getting out," the voice said again, now closer, but still inhumanly distant, as if it came from everywhere. "Not until I've had my revenge." Ben's hand clenched around his gun, but even as he reached for it, he knew it would do no good. He could feel it. There was no escaping this place, no matter how hard he tried. The killer had become one with the precinct, and as long as they remained inside, they were his prisoners. Ben's breath was coming in ragged gasps, and his pulse raced. The sound of his heartbeat was deafening in his ears, drowning out everything else. His thoughts were fragmented, spinning in disarray. What could they do now? What was left to fight? He had no answers, just the oppressive weight of the building pressing in on him. Its dark, twisted corridors closing in like a vice. "We need to end this," he said to Laura, his voice shaky but determined. He glanced around once more, scanning the walls for any signs of an escape. Laura shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "How, Ben? How do we end it? We burn the journal, face the spirit, but we're still trapped here." Ben's gaze hardened, and his resolve returned. He had to think. There had to be a way to break the cycle, to sever the bond between the killer's spirit and the precinct. The journal had only been a temporary solution. It had bought them time, but it hadn't broken the connection. It had only delayed the inevitable. "We have to force him out," Ben said suddenly, his mind working furiously. "We have to break the link between him and this place. We can't keep running from him." "Break the link?" Laura echoed, confusion clouding her face. "How? We don't even know how he's tied to the precinct. We don't know how he's controlling everything." Ben turned to face her fully, grabbing her by the shoulders. His voice was low and steady now. "We have to use what we know. We have to confront him, not as a shadow or a spirit, but as the man he was before he became this thing." "But we already said his name, Ben," Laura protested, her voice trembling. "We already gave him his identity back." "I know, but that's not enough," Ben said. "He's not just a name. He's a part of this place. He's tied to it, just like everything in this building. He can't leave because his death is still unsolved. His spirit is trapped here, and we need to finish what was started." Laura's eyes widened as the realization hit her. "You're saying we have to finish his case? We have to solve the murder?" Ben nodded. "Yes. We have to find the missing piece, the truth. That's the only way to set him free. Set us free." With newfound determination, Ben and Laura began to retrace their steps. They headed back to the evidence room, the heart of the precinct, the place where the killer's story had started. The walls seemed to shift again as they approached, but this time, Ben ignored the creeping sense of dread, focusing only on the task at hand. They reached the evidence locker, and Ben knelt before it, his fingers trembling as he slid the lock open. Inside, amidst a disarray, he found what he was looking for, a folder, the case file from 1982, the one they hadn't been able to uncover before. It had been hidden, buried in the chaos of the precinct's history. But now it was the key. He flipped it open and began to read aloud the details of the case, piecing together the fragments of information, until at last it clicked. The real murderer, an accomplice, had been overlooked for years, and with the truth exposed, the final piece fell into place. Ben's hands shook as he held the evidence, the weight of the truth sinking in. The name of the accomplice, someone who had long been forgotten, had surfaced like a buried bone. As he read the case details aloud, he felt the darkness pressing around him, as if the very walls of the precinct were aware of the revelation. "He's still here," Laura whispered, her voice trembling. "The spirit, he's still here, isn't he?" Ben looked up, his mind spinning with the realization. "No," he said, his voice steady but firm. "The spirit's not just here because of what happened. He's here because of the truth. He's been waiting for this, for someone to finish what was started." He grabbed the file tightly, knowing that they were on the verge of something monumental. The killer's spirit, the twisted remnant of James Carter, had been clinging to the precinct, to the evidence, to a mystery that had never been solved. But now they had the key. The accomplice, the final piece of the puzzle, had been hidden away all these years, a detail so small but so significant. Laura took a step back, her eyes wide with realization. The accomplice, he never got caught. That's why the spirit's been trapped here. He didn't have closure. Ben nodded. "Exactly. And now that we know the truth, we can end this nightmare." With the file in hand, they moved toward the center of the evidence room, the heart of the precinct's twisted history. The temperature had dropped even further, the air thick with tension, and the very walls seemed to breathe with a life of their own. The oppressive darkness was closing in fast, but Ben didn't falter. He couldn't. Not now. "James Carter," he said aloud, his voice echoing in the eerie silence of the room. "We know what happened. We know who was involved. Your accomplice, he's the one who got away. The case wasn't finished. It wasn't your fault." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. The lights flickered violently, then went out, plunging them into total darkness. The air around them grew colder, the oppressive weight of the spirit's presence nearly suffocating. Then a low, rumbling growl filled the room, a voice not from a human, but from something far darker, something monstrous that had once been human. It was a sound that chilled the very marrow in Ben's bones. You think you can just erase what I become?" The voice hissed, the words filled with malice. "I was never meant to be forgotten. The truth is mine, not yours. You'll never take it from me." Ben's pulse quickened, but he held his ground. "You don't belong here anymore. Your story isn't finished, but it's time to move on. You can't stay trapped in this place forever." The room trembled, the air thick with malevolence. The temperature plummeted even more, and Ben could feel the presence, the entity, moving through the room. It was like a storm, an uncontrollable force, and it was heading straight for them. Suddenly, the figure appeared before them, a grotesque, shadowy form, still partially human but distorted beyond recognition. James Carter's spirit, if it could even still be called that, was a hulking mass of darkness and rage, with hollow eyes that burned with an unholy fire. "Enough!" Ben shouted, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and determination. He raised the case file high above his head, the pages catching the dim light that flickered erratically. "The truth is out. The accomplice is dead, but the case is finished. It's over. It's time for you to let go." The spirit shrieked, the sound deafening, as if the building itself were being torn apart. The walls vibrated, the lights flashing so violently that Ben could barely keep his balance. Laura screamed, clutching Ben's arm tightly as the temperature plunged even further. The room felt like it was collapsing in on itself, the very foundations of the precinct shaking. "No!" The spirit hissed, its voice becoming guttural, its form shifting like smoke. "You cannot end this. I am vengeance. I am the blood of this place. You can never take what I am." Ben's mind raced, his heart pounding, but he could feel it. The force was weakening. The truth had power, and now that the spirit had been confronted with it, it couldn't fight the inevitable. The case had been closed. The accomplice had been exposed. The killer had been freed from his prison, and now there was no reason for him to remain. With one final surge of willpower, Ben shouted, "You don't control this place anymore. The truth sets you free. You have to go." The air around them shattered. The room buckled and twisted, and the monstrous figure of the spirit screamed in defiance. But slowly, as if being sucked back into the abyss from which it came, the shadow began to dissolve. Its form shrank, shriveled, and with a final agonizing wail, it vanished into the walls. For a long moment, the room was silent, save for the faint sound of wind outside, the only evidence that they were still alive. The temperature began to return to normal, and the oppressive weight of the spirit's presence lifted. The lights flickered one last time, then remained steady. Ben and Laura stood there, stunned, unable to move. They had done it. They had confronted the darkness and finished what had been started so many years ago. Ben turned to Laura, his voice hoarse. "It's over. We're free." Laura nodded slowly, her face pale but relieved. "I don't know how, but we did it." Ben exhaled, a long, heavy breath. "It's over," he repeated, as if convincing himself. "We can go now." They turned toward the door, but before they could take a step, the building groaned, its structure creaking as if it were slowly collapsing. But the sound wasn't ominous. It wasn't the sound of the building falling apart. It was the sound of release, the sound of something being freed from its chains. Ben and Laura made their way to the exit, the hallways of the precinct now eerily quiet. The lights hummed overhead, steady and unbroken, as if nothing had happened. The door, once sealed shut, now stood open before them. As they stepped outside, the cold night air greeted them like a long-lost friend. The sky above was clear and the stars shone brightly. For the first time since they had entered the precinct, Ben felt a sense of peace, a calm that washed over him like a cleansing wave. The nightmare was finally over. But as they looked back one last time at the station, Ben could swear he saw something. A fleeting shadow in one of the windows, a whisper carried on the wind. It was gone before he could be sure, but for a moment, just a moment, he felt the old precinct watching them, almost as if it had acknowledged their victory. They walked away into the night, leaving behind the horrors of the past. And as they disappeared into the distance, the precinct stood in silence, no longer haunted by the shadow of the past.